As you've seen in previous episodes, we've been refitting the suspension and the road wheels, and the tank is now actually sat on its tracks. We have now repainted the interior of the hull gardenia white, and now it begins the process of getting all this stuff back into the tank. So we're looking at things like the electrics, storage bins, tanks, and final drives. We're going to work from the front to the back, so we're focusing on the driver's controls, driver's hatch. As you can see, we've got the final drives and sprockets. Those are towards the back, so we will look at those in later date. There is a great deal of effort and man hours that goes into getting these things, these parts, as you can see there's so much of them, clean and repainted and looking as they were when they first came out. We have to look at certain aspects when it comes to safety against conservation. To look at safety as a prime factor, because there's going to be guys driving these vehicles, and we want to preserve them as much as we do the vehicles. So as you can see behind us, we've got a plethora of kit that needs to be cleaned, shot blasted, repainted, and brought back to working order in order for us to make the tank looking great lush again. Cleaning all of this stuff is a slightly less glamorous aspect of tank restoration, and does usually tend to fall on the volunteers who aren't here as much as the paid staff, but it is no less more important than rebuilding a gearbox or rebuilding a suspension.
With so many parts to fit to the vehicle, and the fact that we have to do them in a specific order, it's really important that we get them out in sections and have a process in order to take them from their unrestored state as we get them right through to the completed assembly and getting them fitted. Along that process, there's certain things that we've got to look at and make sure that we don't lose any of the history of the vehicle. For example, one of the ammo boxes here has been marked up by the original fitter, and you can see that he's marked the section and that it has to go in, all done in pencil, and very fragile. We don't want to lose that. It's in a place that won't be seen once the vehicle's assembled, so we're not even going to touch that in any way, shape or form. That's going to be left so that part of the history of the vehicle is retained. Leather straps on the front again, these will be removed and cleaned. I'll show you some leather slightly later on. Other items such as this reservoir for the compressor, clearly we want this to work as well, so another aspect of the restoration of this is to get these sent away and tested, make sure the pressure relief valves work okay before we even do any prep, and then we'll start on the painting process. Moving down, these assemblies here ironically don't have to be painted at all, but what we do want to do is get them back and fully working. These are all stiff and full of old grease, so they're completely disassembled, cleaned, replaced with new grease, and as you can see now, all of the levers there work perfectly. I mentioned earlier the leather. This goes on the driver's hatch to protect his head when it's open and closed. This was completely dried out and painted, and we've just gone through our specific process to work on leather in order to bring that back, and it still needs a few more hours spent on it, but I'm sure it'll look nice once it's done. When we decide that we are going to strip the surface in order to paint it, that's how that's done. Again, any opportunity we have to retain the original paintwork is taken if it's not going to be seen, so that it can be looked at in the future. Then we move on to red oxide, very standard and actually was used originally on this vehicle. At this stage we would probably trial fit it to the tank. We don't want to get the white on, try and fit it to the inside of the vehicle and then realise that something's bent or doesn't fit properly. So at this stage we would go onto the vehicle, make sure that it fits very well before we move on to painting it white. This is one of the operating handles for the hatch. The bearings have been cleaned and installed, and it's been masked. All of the trial fitting's been done to make sure that all of the components work correctly, so now we commit to the white. And then finally, this is the pedal box assembly with the gear change pedal and the accelerator. Once we've got all the parts how we want them, once we've test fitted them, we then put the whole assembly together, and then it'll be fitted inside the vehicle.
Right. Fingers are going in.
With the hull now painted, we can now start fitting out all of the components that go inside it. We've decided to start from the driver's cab as much as possible and work our way towards the rear of the vehicle. If you look to your front, you can see we've got the 2 steering tillers now in, and the gear stick selector and the gear change pedal on the left hand side there. The accelerator is in, and all of the associated linkages that take it initially back to these shaft boxes that are situated here and here. From then, whatever input is put in on those sticks is then transferred to the rear of the vehicle to the various components that it controls. To the left and right down here, you can see the operating handles for the hatches, and we'll talk more about that later. And then forward and right here, you can see the operating handle for the armoured shield that covers the driver's sight. Either side of the driver there would be batteries, and the emergency escape hatch is the large opening you see in front of you. We spoke briefly about the driver's hatch. I just want to take through its operation. I'm sitting actually further back than the driver normally would be, and that'll become obvious when the hatch actually opens. Just to take you through a few of the controls, we've got locking cams at the top to hold it in place, and locking levers here with a couple of clips on them. They sit in locks on these cams that hold the hatch fully closed or fully open. There's a safety pin here that's held in place by a captive chain. Once that's removed, you can initially release the hatch from its fully closed position, and then by rotating both handles, well, I'll use one, we now go down to the fully open position. Then replace the safety pin, and you're ready to go. At this stage in the whole refit, the driver's controls are more or less already in. Therefore, the movement that's translated from the driver to the rear is all done through rods which are now all in place. The compressor reservoir bottle is in, the clutch engagement wheels are in for both engines, and this lever here which controls the hydraulic pump for the hydraulic traverse. As you can see, it's got 2 positions marked off and on, and it's also got this little plunger here which locks it in whichever position's been selected. To operate it, pull back on the locking mechanism there, operate the lever, and when the lever gets around to the right place, you'll note that the locking plunger drops into position. Through a series of chains and gear wheels, this operates a rotary sprocket in the engine compartment, And at this stage, the hydraulic pump that drives the turret traverse will come online. Each engine has its own hand-operated clutch control. The reason that it has this is so that when the engine started, it reduces the wear on the batteries and the power desired, and then once the engine's running, the clutches can be engaged by hand. We undo on the locking ring, operate the hand wheel, and as we operate it, the indicator will go down the brass plate until it arrives at the fully engaged position, lock up on the locking device, and that is the clutch for the left-hand engine fully engaged. As well as the work in the fighting compartment, we've also been carrying out some hull fitting within the engine compartment. Over this side you'll see the other end of the engine clutches that we've talked about, the hand wheels. Down here you'll see the other end of the hydraulic pump control for the traverse. Over here you've got one of the two engine mounts, with the front ones in this case, and this would normally be where the engine is situated. To the rear then we would have the transmission or the gearbox. This transfers the drive from the engine through the final drive shafts out to the sprockets and therefore drives the tank. Here you can see some of the pipework that we've started to put in. And just to illustrate one piece in particular that should be familiar to you, Bob talked about this pipe way back in the start and saying that it was a really good example of the coppersmith's art. You can see it's flat at this rear portion on either side, and that is to accommodate the transmission or the gearbox when it goes in, so you can get some idea of what the clearances are when this is fitted. Over here we've got the steering actuators. We'll talk more about those when we've got the steering drums in, so we can show you how they work. And as I've already said, here are the stub axles, the final drive shaft, that transfer the drive from the transmission or the gearbox through the final drive shaft to the sprockets to drive the tank.